doesn't need any introducing, but I just want to tell you that, you know, we here in Chula Vista and environs, you know, Allison coming from East County and some of you coming from heaven knows where, we just really appreciate him. He has really rallied the forces of a bunch of different groups here. And I just want to make sure that we acknowledge him for that. You know, he's got a big job. And as I was telling some of you earlier, you know, when he does these protests and rallies and meetings and what have you, he's running around making videos, he's making speeches, he's rallying troops, he's carrying signs. He must wear himself out, and then he goes home and works for 2 to 3 hours on, you know, sending out emails and following up and posting pictures. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Praise God for Arthur.
Thank
Cheers
you.
for Arthur.
Oh,
Hip,
thank
hip,
you.
hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!
Thank you.
Anyway, I just wanted to, I wanted to thank him. The people who are here are the faithful, people that show up and do the hard work. And, you know, I spoke at our women's luncheon the other day, just briefly, and, you know, it's encouraging when we work together with several different groups. We've got people here of all faiths and none, and we have people here, but mostly we care about our kids and our community. And so I just really appreciate having Arthur come down and be our fire starter and rally us together a little bit and bring a little bit of class to the group, you know. I asked him to put something together because I don't know about any of you, but I got myself into trouble in a social situation the other night at a dinner party when the Drag Queen Story Hour came up, and there was a young girl there, and she was very offended that you know, so I know that there's a good way to handle this, and I said to Arthur, I said, you know, we need to know how to handle this, and it's one thing to go out and protest and raise our arms and scream and yell or whatever we do, but it's another thing when you're in a family situation and there are sensitive people there, or sensitive situations, family members, what have you. There is a message to be made in a situation like that, and I have to admit I'm not equipped to do it, but I can learn, and so all of us can learn when to and when not to, you know, get in someone's face. So with no further ado, I just wanted to thank Arthur for coming down and making time. Hi, Loie. And just really helping us kind of finish this up and kind of tell us what has happened since and where we go from here. Thank you so much.
You got it.
And way to go, Arthur.
Thank you. Okay, you got. Okay, thank you so much. It's already running, so all you have to do is just. Yep.
Thank you so much. All right, I really appreciate it. Is there a stereo or a sound system at all?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, that's totally.
It's off.
Okay.
You can project.
Yeah, you can hear me. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all that matters then. So, okay, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate that. I guess I don't quite know the impact unless somebody tells me. So I guess that's a good thing that I don't know. I just keep pressing ahead. There's so much to talk about. We had this one day alone, we've gotten so much done, and it's just to say, it's like there were just 4 of us basically. I called a meeting with Jill Galvez. I don't even live in the city, and she said, "Okay, come on in." She said, "Give me 4 days when you can meet with me." I gave her only 2. I said Friday would be nice because I'll be here in the area, and she said, "Okay, this is fine." So that's always a good sign right there. If you're able to say, "I want a meeting with you," and they'll go, you name the place and time. That means you already have like you've got some power already, and that's happening for us. A lot of people here have had meetings with other elected officials. That shows already they're now taking us seriously. They don't blow us off. So, all right. So, Laura, really appreciate you letting me have to speak here for the Chula Vista Tea Party tonight. These are the 4 things that I wanted to talk about. It was first how the LGBT agenda is advancing around the world, and to see that there's a much larger fight here connected. It's actually connected to Agenda 21. How many of you know about Agenda 21 at all? Good. There's a good number of you. It has this massive UN-sponsored globalist agenda and the destruction of the family the destruction of the genders is a key part of that, undermining all the voluntary non-government institutions. The second thing is, and I think this will be the bigger part, how do you talk about, hey Greg, how are you? How do you talk about LGBT issues with fellow conservatives, family, acquaintances, so that they understand that we're not coming from hate, but coming from love? You know, people have mentioned how the pro-life movement was pretty radical 40 years ago. And people automatically, I mean, it's shocking. I find out Richard Nixon was pro-choice. Gerald Ford was pro-choice. I mean, and his wife was even more left-wing. I mean, there was like no difference among the parties about a life issue. And now we have a party that's staunchly pro-life, and we have a president who's probably the most pro-life we've ever seen, even more than Reagan. Yeah. I mean, it can be there. You know, after 40 years, you know, pro-life is not marginal. It is substantial, and it's very much mainstream. How you guys doing? Come on in. So the third thing I want to talk about, you know, Laura communicated this to me, and it's so important that we in this pro-family fight know that there are victories already. And the media goes out of its way to shut that down, to make it seem like there's this big mountain of support for LGBT, that we're on the wrong side of history, we're never going to win this fight, when the contrary is the case. There's a lot of evidence on the underground, also at the federal level, that we are winning this. And last of all, I definitely want to talk about what we as Chula Vistans and people who live in the South Bay, so I'm keeping that, hug the whole South Bay, how we can fight this and win this, and we're already taking steps. So first, how LGBT is advancing around the world. This is one of the biggest planks that is pushed by the United Nations. They're very big on this whole human rights agenda, and they're pushing that rag big time, and they've cracked open and completely bankrupted the terms civil rights, to include the right to sleep with whomever you want to call yourself whatever gender you want to, and based on the UN's terrible track record when it comes to protecting children, there is massive amounts of child abuse that's perpetrated by UN officials, by UN soldiers. I mean, it is staggering. And you can, and everybody knows here, Tony makes a really good point about that. LGBT, the final letter is P, for pedophile, to normalize this just egregious behavior of exploiting children without any reproach or recrimination. That's what this is about. It's a UN-sponsored agenda. I've spoken to pastors in Singapore who are talking about how this agenda is aggressively hitting Southeast Asia right now. And who is the big money behind this? American corporations. It was shocking when I found this out. Google, the Alphabet Group, I mean literally they're called Alphabet, that's the parent company for Google. They're behind pushing this. The Human Rights Campaign gets a lot of their money from corporate donors, and the different equality groups that exist in the different states, they're getting big corporate money. You can look at any gay pride parade. You'll see massive corporate sponsors at the front and at the back are pushing this. MassResistance had the first Stand for Truth conference in Salt Lake City, Utah. This was in 2015. I definitely encourage anybody who's watching this or is here, if you go to our website, massresistance.org, you just typing in 2015, Stand for Truth, and you'll find there was an incredible panel of speakers, guests, analysts, strongly invested conservatives. Michael Brown, for example, Dr. Brown was one of them. It was shocking how much corporate America profits from the destruction of the family. The porn industry thrives on this. The medical, specifically the hormonal industries that are pushing transgenderism, there's a lot of money they can make from this. I mean, it's shocking, but that's what it is. It's just it's a big money maker. Come on in. That's where you're seeing it. And of course, it's now having this global push. A shocking example of this is of how this global model is pushing this. It's in Taiwan right now. That country had a referendum last year. 70% of Taiwanese voted no to redefining marriage to be anything outside of one man and one woman. It was a staggering statement. They made it very clear, we don't want this. And yet, you have lawyers going through an aggressive judiciary. They sued and demanded the right for same-sex couples to be recognized, to be able to seek, to seek a marriage status. The judges demanded it. They told the Taiwanese legislature, they call it the Legislative Yuan, that they had to come up with something in accordance with the judge's ruling. And they didn't meet the deadline, and so it was just by judicial fiat that gay marriage was shoved on Taiwan. It's the same pattern that happened here. I mean, state after state had voted by initiative or by legislature to maintain the definition of marriage as one man and one woman. And so you have aggressive, perverse lawyers using judicial tyranny to impose this corrupt agenda. So this is the same pattern that's happening. Taiwan, and I have to really point out how stunningly ironic this is. The current president of Taiwan, Ing-wen Sen, I think that's her name is pronounced, she goes around promoting herself as this big champion of democracy, when the fact is that she spearheaded and was leading the charge to impose gay marriage on a country where 70% of the residents had already voted no. She is the exact opposite of being a champion of the democratic process. She's completely undermining it. And this is the case time and again. In Hong Kong, we are learning about, I mean, there are massive demonstrations. It's just consumed the news for at least a month, if not 2 months. There has been one protest after another. 2 million Hong Kongers went to the streets to protest Beijing, mainland China's attempt to introduce a bill, they call it the extradition bill, which would require any Hong Konger who is on trial for committing a crime, come on in, thank you for coming. Any Hong Konger who's under charge or under indictment for committing a crime to be tried in Beijing instead of being tried in Hong Kong. This is a massive attack on Hong Kong's autonomy. It's a one country, two systems. That was the agreement reached when Britain gave back Hong Kong. So there is a massive pro-democracy movement. It has turned violent, in part when people feel they have no other recourse, they will resort to it. They actually destroyed their own legislature last year. Hong Kongers across the board, they destroyed it, they shut it down as a way to prevent the bill from moving forward. That's how desperate they felt. You know, I don't want to be sounding like I'm advocating violence, but it almost seems like that's something we have to think about doing here in California. I mean, how out of touch our legislature is in California, pushing everything from this perverse sex ed, you know, crystallizing LGBT as some special right that the rest of us have to go along with. What do we do to stop it? But in Hong Kong, many of these pro-democracy activists are pro-gay, or they're homosexuals themselves. So it's a really stunning irony. In one hand, they want to break the power of communist China and their tyranny. But at the same time, they want to fight against political communism, but they're embracing cultural communism. And this is something we have activists we're working with in Hong Kong right now, urging them, and they have worked at great length. They hit to the very core of this issue, as MassResistance does. The whole ideological basis is based on lies. You're not born that way. It's not a civil right. This is very much an uncivil wrong. And it generates a whole host of political tyrannies. And speaking about the global aspect of this, in Canada we have evangelists like Bill Latcott. He's connected with our organization. He is facing 1.5 years in jail for passing gospel tracts at a gay pride parade. 16 women in Vancouver or in British Columbia, these are immigrants, women who came from other countries to seek the Canadian dream, for lack of a better word, and they run tanning salons or wax salons. There is a biological male named Jonathan Yaniv who has gone to 16 of these salons demanding to get a Brazilian wax. And he has all of his genitalia still. But he goes claiming to be a woman. And he had the authority, per Canadian law, federal and provincial, to take these 16 salon owners to the Human Rights Tribunal in that province and pursue them for civil rights violations. This is happening now. This is how insane it's gotten in Canada. These human rights tribunals are completely Soviet-style, commissions that are just looking to beat down anybody who speaks against or resists this agenda. There it is in Canada. The good LGBT has been working hard trying to push this ideology in Central and South America. The good news is, by and large, they have been very effective at fighting back against it. The communities in Mexico, in Mexico, for example, our organization worked with a considerable group of people The majority of Mexican states, they're the United States of Mexico, technically, just as we're the United States of America. The majority of them do not recognize gay marriage. DFA and a couple of the more liberal states have enacted it. The previous president wanted to enact it nationwide. The protests, the people who took to the streets, it was in the hundreds of thousands. I mean, it puts us to shame. I've often joked, Mexico should build the wall to keep us out, because they build a wall to protect their culture. And I got to tell you, I mean, yeah, I want border security. Don't get me wrong, we need that. But you know, Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, they had the thickest walls in recorded history, massive. And yet that empire collapsed precisely because they stopped believing in what they stood for. They died internally, they didn't protect their culture on the inside, and so the Muslims had no problem overrunning and just destroying it and ushering in the Ottoman Empire. The thickest walls in the world won't make a difference if you don't have something to protect. And I mean, this is just unmistakable. You have to have something to protect. It's not enough just to put a wall up. I think that's so important. And this is like, I'll say just briefly, talking about this world issue, you know, there's a lot of things that I'm really happy with President Trump when it comes on the life issue, when it comes on immigration, security, trade. But there's a mistake that he is making, and he made it recently at the UN. He gave a great speech on religious liberty. Loved it. It was needed to be done. But there's the same conflict. Pushing to decriminalize homosexuality around the world is not the way to go. For descriptive reasons alone, the country should be allowed to mitigate or to mandate. No, this should not become normalized. Doesn't mean that everybody should be locked up. I'm not advocating, nor is anyone else who's pro-family, advocating for people to be thrown off of buildings or thrown into jails or tortured or murdered because they're in bondage to a perversion. But to normalize it by removing it as its criminal sanction, at least on the surface, is not wise, it's not good. In Singapore, they still maintain it is still criminal. Homosexuality is still a crime, but it exists as it serves a descriptive role to indicate the cultural morals of the society. They don't lock up everybody, the resources aren't there, but it's discouraged, it's not promoted, and that's really the way it should be. You know, in effect, it should be treated like smoking, and people are limited in where they can smoke, and that's the same direction that should happen. I can say there's some good fronts when it comes to the fight on the world stage. There was a big victory in Bermuda. More judicial tyranny occurred. The Bermudan Supreme Court ruled that the Parliament had to pass legislation to recognize gay marriage. The Parliament said, no, we won't. They overturned the court. And they defied us, says, we're not going to do it. And they're still part of the Commonwealth. The United Kingdom can have some say or some influence. They said, we're not going to comply. Forget it. No, we're going to recognize one man and one woman. African countries still recognize one man and one woman. And in fact, they're becoming more militant and even resentful of corporate interests or global interests stepping in and telling them how to manage the affairs of their families and their communities. The Philippines, their Supreme Court rejected an attempt to enact gay marriage. They're trying the same judicial tyranny process in all of these countries, but more of them are developing a backbone and saying no. So another thing we're trying to work on with some of our activists in Texas, common law countries have a doctrine, the doctrine of lesser magistrate. So if we have judges or we have larger scale institutions, legislative or otherwise, enacting policies that are contrary to the national charter or to the law of nations, local jurisdictions can say we won't comply. In fact, that's already happening on Second Amendment issues. 6 cities in Texas have made themselves baby sanctuaries, unborn sanctuaries. 6 cities will not allow abortion. I know a couple counties in New Mexico have done that. They will not fund, support, endorse, promote abortion. And in New Mexico, they're even defying the state legislature. I would like to see that start happening across the country. Municipalities will direct their clerks. We will not issue gay marriage licenses. We will not recognize gay marriage. It has to start somewhere. Even during the Civil War, the Confederate states seceded one by one, but then sections of the states seceded back. West Virginia was created because it broke away from Virginia, saying we're not going to leave the Union, we don't support slavery, we don't support plantation tyranny. Eastern Tennessee, the same thing almost happened. That part of the state almost broke away. There were free cities throughout the South, in fact, that still recognized the Union. A lot of people don't know about that. So this is the mindset we have to start having. Just like we saw last year as cities defied the sanctuary state law. Said, we're not going to comply, we're still going to work with ICE. And you're just going to have to cut off our funding. Okay, so on a global level, this is what's happening. Southeast Asia is a big target. Africa has been a big target. African countries have been militantly pushing against this. We've seen in Southeast Asia, this is the push. Taiwan toppled. They're trying to target Singapore, Thailand as well. I spoke to some of my activists in Hong Kong. They informed me the sex tourism trade is so prevalent in Thailand. And there's so much exploitation. It's very common, you know, and there's a lot of transvestism in Thailand, which is part of the reason why this LGBT push has become more militant in that country. So we're keeping our eye on these countries. We want to ensure that people are ready to fight this. Sometimes a stunning irony, some of the governments, sadly, in these third world countries, that they may be dictatorial governments, but when it comes to family, they will fight for that too. So it kind of creates strange bedfellows. And I'll wrap up with this in this section of it. In Hong Kong, there is a general perception to be pro-democracy is to be pro-gay. That's a real problem. I mean, that's misunderstood. The full implications of this are not clear to a lot of Hong Kongers. The older generation in Hong Kong are stunningly pro-Beijing. They support the mainland government precisely because they're pro-family. And sadly enough, because they want to maintain the integrity of mom and dad, marriage, and the procreation of children. And sadly enough, many Asian communities in that section, in Southeast Asia, they sadly see the advancement of these pro-Western values as also hand in hand with the promotion of homosexuality. That's a real problem.
Yes.
And there's a need for us to kind of divorce that in the mind of the world. That's a key. That's a larger goal to fight. I think smaller ways to fight this goal occurs with as countries either withdraw from the UN or stop funding it. I mean, there are political solutions that are outside of our own grasp right now, but that's what's happening. That's the fight that's going on, and why all the more our fight here. We can be leaders as the United States to say no to that. And I have to tell my Hong Kong contacts, no, a lot of people in the United States don't support gay marriage. No, we don't support this LGBT ideology. We don't support our children being force-fed this perversion. And what we're doing, and I'll end with this, the stuff that Chula Vistans have done,